I'm honored to host Paul English and Tracy Kidder. We're here talking about Tracy's recent book, A Truck Full of Money, which is a fantastic book. And I want to start off with Tracy. Tracy, can you talk about the research process involved for making this book?
Yeah, but most of it was following Paul around, which meant sometimes taking 6 o'clock in the morning trains from South Station or red eyes from California back to Boston. It was interesting. It was fun. You know, it's pretty much the way I do it all the time. I mean, I've done it now for, I don't know how many years, 30 some years, 35, 36 years. I just I try to be a good guest in a person's life. I mean, he can tell you whether I was or not. But I
usually,
I hang around, you know, and then so there's what I think of that as the primary research. I mean, when I started this with a curiosity about what had happened to the world of the digital in the last 35 years, because back in the early 80s, I watched a team of computer engineers build a new computer back in Massachusetts, and I left that subject as fast as I could just because I wanted to see the rest of the world. And that book, because it was to many people's surprise, including mine, a success, I wanted to make use of that success by exploring the rest of the world. And I did that for 30-some years. But then I got sort of curious as to what had happened, or thought, anyway, it might be fun to look into. And I knew Paul from Partners in Health, Dr. Paul Farmer's organization, and asked him to show me around. And after a while, I thought, well, my guide should be my subject as well, partly because, at least at that time, it seemed to me, you know, his career spanned a very big segment of the digital age. I mean, really late in the development of the personal computer to now, you know. Right. And also his experience had been pretty broad in it, programmer and a manager of programmers, and then an entrepreneur starting his own companies. But as time went on, I think of it, you know, I was looking for a window on this world, and it was an interesting window. I mean, the view was interesting, but I found the window more interesting than the view. Mm-hmm. So, you know, so I did different kinds of research. I mean, I go out and talk to people who'd known Paul, and talk to experts in various departments. Paul's life's pretty varied, so I ended up learning a fair amount about things like bipolar disorder and myasthenia gravis, which your mom had, you know, as well as trying to learn something about the World Wide Web. And I had the great privilege during all of this to interview Donald Knuth, who was really I think a lot of people would say you might call him the progenitor of computer science. That wouldn't be entirely fair, but he organized, and you know, and in the first volumes of The Art of Computer Programming seems to have pulled together the best that was known and thought at the time, including some of what he had done. And he's still working on it. Right. Fascinating guy. And I was going to tell you, this is completely off the subject, but it was wonderful for me to talk to him. I enjoy reading him immensely. Right. Not The Art of Computer Programming, which is not meant for the likes of me, but he writes really lucidly on interesting philosophical subjects. There's a book that I highly recommend if you don't know it, called Things That Computer Scientist Rarely Talks About. And he's quite religious. He has fascinating takes on God. And one of his many published interviews, I mean, that people have had with him, he uses the word geeks. This is one of my favorite things about it. He says, just for brevity's sake of brevity, let's say that people like me are geeks, and we are 2% of the population. And he goes on to explain that in his view, it's probable that the people who built the pyramids years ago, the 2% of them would have been great computer programmers if there had been computers at the time. So computer programming, the great gift for it was probably something he thinks inborn, awaiting its instrument. And he has some empirical evidence of that. Anyway, I don't know how I got off on that.
Right.
The term geek is interesting to me because, like so many of these words that were really nasty terms once. Geek, I think, referred to these guys that would play wild men in, in those traveling caravan things around the country. And as for nerd and geek are now terms of praise, often used by people who call themselves nerds and geeks. I'm a basketball nerd. I'm a, geek. Anyway, I got off the subject.
No.
But that's one of the great things about my job is that I get to talk to such people.
Yeah. And I noticed that Kuth's book is like 2,200 pages long. So.
Well, he's working, as I understand it, I think it's volume 4. He's been on that a long time. I think volume 4 has 5 volumes already. But it's tough because he's been writing about algorithms. And
right.
I met him because of a close old friend of Paul's named Carl Berry, who is one of the people who helps to maintain the program tech.
Right.
It was a lot of fun. Anyway.
So behind the name, A Truckload of Money, what inspired that?
There's a story from people. Some of the people here know this guy, Bill O'Donnell, a very fine programmer indeed. Lovely guy. When Bill O'Donnell left Kayak, the engineers stood and gave him a standing ovation. That's, I'm told, very, very rare in the world of computer engineers. Some years before, Billo and Paul Schwenk and Jeff Rago had all taken a break from Paul and had started their own little company, and it wasn't doing very well. They had nobody really to sell their product, And Paul came to visit them in their shabby little office, and he said, "I'm starting something new." And this is well before Kayak, long before. And they said, "Well, we'll think about it." And Paul left, and Bill and Rago and Schwenk all remember the story exactly the same way. They said, "Well, Rago and Schwenk said, we'd like to sort of keep trying. We think this still might work." And Bill said, "Look, guys, I feel bad about this. You can have all my stock, but I'm going to go with Paul." And then he felt it was necessary to explain. He said, "Because someday this boy's going to get hit by a truck full of money, and I'm going to be standing beside him." And he was, actually, when Kayak was sold. And also, he was standing there after Boston Light was sold, and Paul took his share of the $33.5 million and divided it in half and distributed it to the employees. People remember that sort of thing.
Right.
But I meant the title with some irony, because I think that several years that I spent with Paul, I think were difficult years for him, and I think it's difficult sometimes to recover from a great success. I suppose there was something autobiographical about that in my mind, because I do remember when I wrote The Soul of a New Machine, I was only 34 years old, and suddenly, I was given the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, and I got very confused. I drank a lot. I just found it difficult. I was suddenly separated from all my brethren, all my writer friends, and so I was on the lookout for this, and I think Paul was casting around looking for things to do, and it's the right things to do. What am I saying? Anyway, so a truck is. I know Billo meant that in a very casual way, the truck full of money. That's just meaning a lot of money, but I thought of the actual truck.
Right.
It's something that hits you. I meant it with a bit of irony, because I don't think. The one thing I think, to my way of thinking, that Paul isn't is meretricious. He's not tremendously materialistic, except about cars.
So winning the Pulitzer, in your early 30s, many authors wait their whole entire lives, even an opportunity. A lot don't get it. So what did it feel like to hit such a grand accomplishment?
It was very. It was a little daunting. I was elated at first. I couldn't believe it. And then I did have writer friends who kind of ceased to be friends. They were so envious. I probably would have been the same in their place. It was strange. I was pretty young. Even young for my age. just barely out of adolescence. Possibly, I don't know. A lot of young men are, I think. One of the things is you really want to believe when you get a prize like that you've deserved it, It's sort of like being an American and having quite a lot of privilege and thinking, well, I've earned my privileges, But once in my case, I was a judge for the Pulitzers later and also for the National Book Award. And what you realize is that usually those prizes are given to, you have a committee, and pretty much everything, the prize goes to everybody's third choice. But I did meet the guy who had been a wonderful writer, really, who had been my champion. At least he told me he had been. I forget how I met him as a kind of wonderful writer named Paul Fussell. And he said, "You owe me a drink." I said, "Why?" He said, "I was your advocate for the Pulitzer." And I said, "I'll buy you 2 drinks."
Well, when you talked about winning the Pulitzer and you're feeling very humble towards it because it's such an honor, but you
I wasn't humble. On the contrary.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when Paul sold Kayak, he was told by a lot of people how great he was.
Yeah.
And then what Paul said to himself, I didn't actually work that hard. He thought, I'm just good at something that makes a lot of money.
Yeah, that's, I think, if there was one thing Paul told me, one thought I overheard the whole time I was with him, that's the one I think would stick with me, if there was just going to be one that stuck with me. Because it strikes me as true and unusually honest and open, and unusual too, probably for some of the people in this general area who have made great fortunes. I mean, I do think that we tend to feel in America that making huge amounts of money is almost an apotheosis in itself, both evidence and just reward for one's superiority. And, I'm not necessarily blaming the tycoons, though some of them, I suppose, do buy into it. I mean, it's even more extreme because this is technology, and so one gets the feeling, these people are masters of the future as well as the present, the veritable Darwins and Newtons, and I mean it gets quite excessive, like so many things. But I don't think Paul ever bought into that cultural grandiosity.
So what's one of your favorite stories from the book?
A lot of them. I like them all.
Yeah.
But let me think. I like the story of that the book begins with, of his going to Boston Latin School when, and learning how to, inventing for himself the fishing,
Yeah.
to get the control of attendance so that he could play hooky for the next 6 years. It probably has set him back a ways in his in his professional life. But the one I really like a lot, and I think is really interesting, is that time when you felt you had been fired and you were you were in a deep, deep depression, partly, no doubt, from bipolar. And he latched onto the idea of doing something with Chinese chess, and ended up making this, along with Carl Berry, just the two of them, making this really, for its time, quite remarkable, elaborate website with, a regular Shangxi palace, Chinese chess palace, where you could go and you could watch other people playing, and you could kibitz, and it's the most popular board game, I guess, in the world. And I like the fact, what Paul, the way I always understood the story, that I think you would agree, is that he coded his way out of depression, which is quite remarkable. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's much better than languishing in it,
It's true. Yeah, I've noticed with, in American history, we go through generations of wealth creation. And for the longest time in American history, wealth was handed down from one generation to the next. And now we're seeing people such as Paul, who comes from humble beginnings, now coming into wealth. So I'm wondering, your humble beginnings in Boston, how did that affect your success in tech?
So I grew up in a working class family. My dad was a pipe fitter. He worked for the same company for 49 years. And my mother was a social worker. And I grew up in a family of 9 We had a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, so it was pretty modest. And first of all, when I would see people who had money, I just thought of them as just a foreign species. I thought money people were very different than my family and me. And even, I have this funny thing to this day, like when I get on the shuttle to New York from Boston, where I live now, and I see all these guys get on the plane wearing suits, I actually get uncomfortable with people wearing suits. There's something bizarre about it. I don't quite understand it, but the whole prestige and power, particularly people who work in finance, just feels very foreign and uncomfortable to me. The guys I hang out most with now in Boston, there's a group of 6 of us, and we've been playing poker since we were 12 years old. And one of them, Sabina's a landscaper, Bob's a plumber, Arthur's a manufacturing engineer, Andrew's an IT guy, Ray's a marketing guy, and we're just, it's like my comfort zone, just kind of like normal guys. And a lot of times in tech, even though I love team building and design and customer support, the business part of tech is something I actually have very little interest in.
Mm-hmm. Now, the business aspects of tech, did you partner with Schwenk in Kayak? Did he handle those aspects, and did you mostly handle like the day-to-day engineering operations?
Yeah, so my Kayak co-founder is a guy named Steve Hafner. Mm-hmm. Steve was one of the founders of Orbitz. And the idea for Kayak actually came in a conversation between Steve Hafner and one of our investors, Joel Cutler at General Catalyst. And the two of them, with Steve leaving Orbitz, which was what I would describe as a travel store, they basically came up with the idea of creating a pure search engine where nothing is sold, but every product is indexed. And in 2004, when we created Kayak, there was no one website that had every single flight and every single hotel. Like Expedia, for example, and to this day will only show hotels when they make a commission. They don't show you every hotel. And so Kayak, I think there were 2 things we focused on. One is making sure we had more inventory than anyone else. Even if people didn't pay us, we had them on the website. We were really obsessed. And we showed their actual phone number, their actual website address, just complete transparency. And then the second thing we focused on, and then that I focused on at Kayak, was I saw other travel sites at the time as bloatware. They were big and animated graphics and slow. And it was shocking to me how it would take 45 seconds to find a flight. So we began this quest, which I worked on for 10 years, which was how to do something that wasn't faster than Expedia, but was shockingly different because it was so much faster than Expedia. So we were the first guys to do sub-second search for travel across every vertical. And it was non-trivial to build that because we're sitting on top of systems that are themselves decades old. But yeah, we wanted to be full inventory and really fast. Mm-hmm. You mentioned when you had your start at Boston Light, after you guys were acquired, you came across a sizable equity valuation, yet there are certain people who weren't receiving as much money, and you decided to spread that money around. What was going through your mind when you decided to do that? Usually, every time I do an M&A deal, whether I'm buying a company to become part of my company or looking at selling a company, and I've sold, I think, I've started 5 real companies. Just think, 4 were successful. 1, I lost $2 million, which is very painful. It's a time in my life when I just made money and then lost it. But when I look at selling companies, I actually never have done the math, even at Kayak, about how much money I was going to make, but I knew how much money my assistant made. Mm-hmm. I knew how much stock people had on my team who didn't have very much stock. And even for my new company, Lola, we're only a year old, so it's crazy, crazy premature to even think about exit value. Hopefully that's many years away because I like running companies independently as long as I can. But when it comes time to try to find an exit for Lola, I'm going to try to figure out, can my assistant buy a house? Mm-hmm. And I have a lot more stock than she has, so if she can buy a house, I'll probably be able to buy a lot of houses. Not that I would buy a lot of houses, but it just, to me, it seems to make sense to think about a company in terms of how will the financial outcome impact the people who have the least amount in the company. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why I think like that, but I know how many shares my assistant has. I know how many shares my travel agents have who work at Lola, my new company. And I would like to make sure they all do well financially. Right. I mean, it's really hard to determine how you're going to spread a cap table at the beginning of a venture when you don't know how things are going to play out. Exactly.
Now, it seems like your mentor, Thomas White, inspired some of your thoughts towards charitable work and also towards running businesses. Can you explain his impact on your life to us?
Yeah, so Tom is a guy that I met back in, I want to say about 2000. He was the uncle of a childhood friend of mine, and I had sold a company, Boston Light, to Intuit, and I made a bunch of money. I wanted to give away most of the money I made, so I called this guy, Tom White. He was 80 years old at the time, and I asked him if he could teach me how to give away money efficiently. And I remember, one funny story is I did a little bit of research on him before I met him, and I learned that the biggest beneficiary of his work was this Dr. Paul Farmer, who had created this organization called Partners in Health that I serve on the board now. And when I met Tom, I said, I understand that Partners in Health has raised $30 million for Haiti to help with healthcare, and he was very proud of that. And then I said, but I heard that 20 million of that came from you personally. You probably think that makes you a good person. I think it makes you a really shitty fundraiser. And then I worked with Tom on trying to figure out how to make him more highly leveraged, because he made about $100 million over his career, was an estimate he had told me once. And he told me that his plan was to die penniless with owning no possessions. And so I kind of have the same goal, that I want to die with nothing. I mean, I don't want to die with nothing, but I want to die, I want to have a bed. I probably want to have whatever the iPhone 56 is, a Kindle, and a clock radio. And I think that's pretty much all I'll need.
You're sick.
Yeah. Now, can you talk about your idea generation process? Because it seems like you're just constantly coming up with new ideas or new ventures.
Yeah, I actually teach entrepreneurship at MIT, and I lecture on entrepreneurship at a pretty diverse set of universities. I lecture at Rhode Island School of Design, which is a phenomenal design school on the East Coast, Berklee College of Music, Dartmouth Film School, and I really enjoy focusing on innovation in industries outside of tech and trying to figure out how you encapsulate innovation, like what are the key elements that make something new. And the work that I've done across those multiple industries has taught me the most important thing to do as an innovator is to pick the right problems to fix. And if you can find a problem that really bothers you, that bothers you so much that you can imagine spending 5 years of your life working on the problem, and it's also a problem that bothers millions of other people, if you find the right problem and it's a real problem that is causing serious issues for people, then all you need to do is lock onto it, hire an exceptional team, and just keep trying stuff. And most likely the first thing you do won't be successful, but if you've picked the right problem and you're committed to solving it, eventually you will. So the advice I give to my students is become problem detectors before they become solution. A lot of entrepreneurs, when they look to raise money, they pitch what they've built. I, as an investor, am less interested in what they built. What I'm interested in is the team and what problem they're trying to solve, because the initial solution is usually not the final solution. Being a problem detector means, if you're really good at it, and I think it's something you can practice, just like you can practice mindfulness, being a problem detector means you look at all kinds of problems in life. So I remember I gave a lecture on this at Dartmouth Film School, and there was a girl sitting in the front, and she had a Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup, and the Dunkin' Donuts, you flip the top back, and sometimes when you're drinking the coffee, the thing flips up and hits you in the nose. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced that. And I had asked her when I saw that coffee cup, has that ever flipped up and hit you in the nose? She said, yeah, it has, and everyone kind of got a big laugh in the audience. I said, well, why haven't you done anything about it? And since then, people have invented coffee cups that you just turn, like you just spin it, and two holes line up. I think it's just notice a problem. If the problem really, really bothers you, just keep thinking of solutions. I'll tell you an example of something that bothered me today as we're walking around San Francisco. I am bothered by noise. And I'm really bothered by car horns and rudeness of car horns when drivers beep overly aggressively at people for not necessarily doing something bad. And so I always think of solutions like, how can I have less beeping? And a couple of solutions that a few of us talked about this week is, one, what if you made a regulation that there was a car horn placed inside the passenger cabin as well as under the hood? Another one is, what if you had the steering wheel gave a minor electric shock? So you still could beep the horn,
right,
but there'd be a little bit of payback in doing it. So yeah, to me, it's innovation is about when you see something that is wrong, just obsess on it and say, I don't know the answer yet, but I know this is wrong, and I know I'm going to find a solution to it.
Gotcha. Instead of trying to sell a solution and trying to find a problem,
yes.
Find the problem and build a solution for it.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned how important it is to have a team around you. I've noticed through your career, you've had these people called 20-plussers who've been around with you for 20 plus more years. Can you explain how that came to happen?
Yeah. I don't think it was explicitly intentional. Back like when I cut my Boston Light stock in half so I could dilute everyone else up so everyone else could get much more of the company, I wasn't explicitly thinking then I'm doing this so these people will be with me for 20 years. I mean, I think that was one of the things that contributed to people following me company to company is they saw that I treated people well. But I'm just someone who values longevity in relationship, and I don't know how much this has to do with my family growing up in a small house with 9 people. But the fact that, again, I still hang out with these guys. We've been playing cards, we're 12. I just value long-term relationships. And I think that if you create a work environment that's really fun and where people really like each other and where you debug, I probably spend 5% of my time as a psychologist where I observe body language and I try to find things in my company that aren't working and where is stress. And I try to eliminate that, and I name it, and then bring people together and say, Hugh, how come you interrupt Kathy all the time? Or whatever it is. I mean, I'll try to
get a word in edgewise.
Yeah.
The other way around.
Yeah, I think if you spend a lot of time trying to make sure the team dynamic is really, really strong, people will love their job, they'll help recruit more people, and they'll probably stay there for years.
Yeah. Can you explain, you mentioned your family growing up, and there's 9 people living in a 3-bedroom house. In the book, it mentioned that your job was to make people feel happy. Did that psychology also influence your business practices?
I never thought of it exactly like that, but no one ever assigned me to be the peacemaker in my college. My dad was a drinker, and we had strife in my home. I don't know why I became the peacemaker, but I took on that role. And when anyone in my family is in crisis, I'm the one that they call to help manage situations. Like, I have a brother with a brain injury that I manage. I host a family dinner every Tuesday night, and I organize my business travel, so every Tuesday night I can be home to cook, and my siblings all come over, and a 90-year-old neighbor comes over. So I think, I think problem solving is all about maintaining relationships. Like in my small house I grew up in, because it was congested, if someone was drunk or angry or fighting, it caused strife across the whole family that rippled across, that everyone could feel it. If instead you could debug that and try to figure out how to alleviate some of the stress in the family, it made it a happier place for everyone. And I think that's true in the workplace as well. I've always promised people who've come to work for me that I will make this the best place they've ever worked, and I'll make them more productive than they've ever been. And I take those commitments pretty seriously. And if I promise someone that I'll make this the best place they've ever worked, and yet they're sitting next to someone who's kind of an asshole and causes a lot of stress, I'm going to fail on my commitment. So I need to debug that and figure out why are 2 people not getting along. So I guess the peacemaker part of me that grew up in this family, large family in a small house, translated into, in the work, I try to be a bit of a peacemaker as well.
Right. And you also mentioned that because there are so many things going on in your house, one constant would be being able to program, and that sort of gave you kind of consistency and an escape. Do you find that the main driving passion for you to code, or are there other things involved that push you towards computers?
Yeah, I always took work pretty seriously, and part of it was work was a way for me to have an identity outside the house. Inside the house, it felt very controlled, and outside the house, you could form your own identity, get your own job, make your own money, and I remember, I was making minimum wage, which back when I was in high school, I think was $2.65 an hour. And I worked at a drugstore at the Dedham Mall outside of Boston. And I remember one time on a Friday night, we used to go out drinking after work. I think I was 16 at the time. And I remember always having a pizza, bottle of wine, and then maybe smoking some weed or other things like that. And I woke up one Saturday morning really, really severely hungover, but it wouldn't ever cross my mind to call in sick to work. And I think I was still so hungover that I couldn't drive, even though I had owned a car. So I took a taxi to work. And my father was furious when he found out that I would spend money in a taxi. But I got to work, and I worked that day. And to me, I was just always proud of, forming your identity outside of the home, and work as a part of that.
Right. And then also you worked while going to school at the same time, taking night classes.
Yeah, I worked full-time in college. I actually didn't apply to college. I wanted to be a musician. And I went to a very good high school, one of the best high schools in the country. In fact, Boston Latin, founded in 1635. And I tested at the top of the city for getting into that school, but I graduated at the bottom of the class. 30 of my classmates got accepted to Harvard, so it's a really good high school. And I didn't apply to college. I was going to be a musician. And then my parents found out I could go to state school for free because I aced my SATs. I test well. And the only state school I could get into at that point was UMass Boston. And lucky for me, they had an amazing jazz band. So I wrote for a 15-piece band and then worked full-time as a programmer and went to school at night. It took me 5 years to get my bachelor's degree, but then I stayed on 2 more years to get my master's degree, and I ended up teaching there.
Excellent. Now, going to night classes, you see a different crowd of people, so you're probably with more adults, maybe veterans, and that influenced you too? Yeah,
I remember taking a class where we were studying the Vietnam War, and the guy on my right was a vet in a wheelchair, injured from the war. And then the guy sitting in front of me had lost his son in the war. They were debating the morality of war. And I remember thinking, like, my friends going to Harvard are not having this experience that I'm having right now. So there were certain advantages of being in a poor commuter school, that you got to experience different cross-sections of the city that you might otherwise not if I went down like an Ivy League path. It's kind of like last year, I drove Uber for a while. And I really love that because... In your Audi, right? In my Tesla, actually. Oh, your Tesla. Yeah. And that was an Uber X ride, too. Yeah, it was Uber X. Quite a deal. Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. I did it for research for my company, for my new company, Lola. There's something that I wanted to learn about around ratings. But I was also surprised to learn that my world is actually quite narrow. In Boston, generally, the only people I have communication with are my family, people who work in tech, or people who work in Haiti, because that's where I spend most of my time in those 3 areas. And driving Uber around, I got to meet all kinds of crazy people who lived in Boston. And it reminded me of my college days where it just was a very, very diverse set of people. Yeah. And you learn more about yourself in that process, don't you? I think so, yeah. One of my best experiences going through was community college, and I worked while going to community college, and I just met so many different people, different walks of life, and it definitely impacted me. Now, growing up in your economic situation, and then all of a sudden selling Kayak, and now you have $120 million, like, what was going through your mind? Yeah, again, when we sold the company, first we took it public in July 2012, and then we sold it to Priceline in 2013. I didn't do the math first, figuring out how much money I made, but I remember how much money my assistant made. And then when I did figure out how much money I made, it just felt surreal, and it felt that I didn't deserve the money, and I didn't deserve to keep the money. So I thought that the money was something that would temporarily be placed into my bank account, but then I needed to find things to do with the money, because money sitting in the bank account is kind of useless. It's not the point of money. The point of money is to conduct transactions, and sitting in the bank account, you're failing its objective. So, my goal is to invest my money in nonprofits and try to find ones that are meaningful to things that I care about, and hopefully I will liquidate all my Kayak money for the nonprofits I'm working with now. Excellent. And once you did that, the IPO event, and once you did sell the company, were you getting like thousands of requests of your time for donations? Yeah, I still do. Yeah. It's very painful. I probably get I don't know, 200 or 300 emails a day, and I probably get a dozen personal requests for help. I had a woman today ask me if I'd pay her mortgage. And I get a dozen nonprofits a day soliciting me, and it's painful to say no, but the reality is I just don't have the bandwidth to engage with that many dozens of people every day.
Right. And it's heartbreaking too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk to us about your background with Haiti and how you got involved in there?
Yeah, Haiti's become a big part of my life. I first went to Haiti in 2003, but I've been many times since then. I was in Haiti a week ago. I look at, some people describe Haiti as the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. I don't think of it like that at all. I think of it as the country with the most opportunity, because my work is all outside of Port-au-Prince. Port-au-Prince is complete insanity, the capital, and it's confusing, and I'm intimidated by it because there's so much stuff, crazy stuff going on there. But when you go out into the Central Plateau or down south or up north, they're very simple communities with very little technology. Even like the farming instruments are, in many cases 100 years old. This is not even modern farming technology. So being someone who has resources and has a network of people that know about healthcare, et cetera, it's been really fun for me to work in Haiti because I get extremely high ROI for money. Like in Boston, I support a number of projects in Boston, and I know what $10,000 will do for nonprofit in Boston, but I also know what $10,000 will do for nonprofit in Haiti, and it's transformational. For $10,000, you can put water in a village where people previously had to walk hours and hours to get clean water. In many cases, they would send the kids wouldn't actually go to the clean source to get from a river that's contaminated. And you can transform healthcare of a community of 1,000 people for just 10 grand. So it's kind of exciting. My latest project is in education, and my project is called Summits. The website is summits.org. And we run a network of 41 schools in the Central Plateau. We have 350 teachers and administrators, and we have 10,000 students. And it's really exciting to begin a project where we took over these schools which have been failing, where we have 10,000 students. And if we can change the lives of these students and how they learn, and change the lives of these teachers, it's going to have massive rippling positive effects for that region and hopefully for the country.
Can you explain like the teaching techniques you guys use in the classroom?
Yeah. So I don't have an education background, but I've been learning quite a bit about it since I've been on this project for the last 2 years. I'll describe a scene in the classroom. When I was in the classrooms in May, I visited 2 different schools, and then I was visiting 3 other schools last week in Haiti. And in May, like the way schools operate in many developing countries, the teachers at the front of the class, the students all sit in rows. They may or may not have books. And it's almost like a call and repeat, where the teacher will call out a lesson on the right on the chalkboard, and the students just have to repeat what the teacher said. In some cases, not completely understanding what the teacher is saying, particularly in Haiti. This is a bit of a tangent, but the way French is taught, the native language is Creole. Sometimes French is taught because it's a language of government, but the teachers themselves don't actually speak French in these rural areas, so it's kind of ridiculous watching them try to teach French, and they're conjugating incorrectly, and the pronunciation is bad, and there's no books in French. It just was, the call and repeat thing just was not a very good environment. We worked with 3 different groups that we researched for a year. We picked 3 groups to help us completely change pedagogy and content as well. And when I was in the classroom last week, the kids are all sitting in circles now in all of the classrooms in all of our 41 schools. And the teachers have been trained that the best thing they can do for teaching is to get the students talking to each other. And so the teachers now will lecture, but then they ask the kids, what do you think about that? And what do you think about that? And they have the kids interviewing each other in the class. Right. And it was completely transformational, like from May into last week, to see that change. And that was a result of a teacher training program that took us a year to put in place, but we executed on it this summer. It was pretty exciting.
Excellent. I mean, you're developing a group of free thinkers, who are given the power to actually talk, be able to have the ability to take part in their education and not feel like they're just going to be just memorizing the same facts over and over again. Now, you talked about meditation and Buddhism. Have you guys practiced with any mindfulness in those classrooms or experimented with anything?
It's interesting. One of the teachers who works in the south, in an area of Haiti called Philanthropy, he's a physician and a teacher, and he meditates. In fact, the first time I meditated with this guy, it was very funny to talk to Pierre. We were talking one night about mindfulness, and he said, would you like to meditate with me tomorrow morning? And I said, I'd love to. And he said, do you want to start at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock? And I said, 6 o'clock. And he said, do you want to do 1 hour meditation or 2 hours? I said, 1 hour. This guy was hardcore.
Yeah.
And there are people in Haiti, as there are in every country in the world, who meditate. And we're trying to figure out how to bring meditation into the schools. There have been a couple little experiments, but I'd like to bring it formally into the school. Realistically, I think that's probably January or next September, because we have a number change we're doing this fall.
Gotcha. And do you have a regular meditation practice yourself?
I do very simple meditation. I meditate usually just for 15 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes in the morning. More than meditation, I do mindfulness exercises. I think are almost as good as meditation. Just making sure that you're always extremely present and noticing people around you and objects around you and not getting lost in your head and trying to, let me see, one of my favorite stories about mindfulness is a Vietnamese Buddhist that I really like named Thich Nhat Hanh. And one of his books, he told the story where he had an American Buddhist visiting him, and Thich Nhat Hanh had made him a dinner, and after dinner, the American took the dishes to go to wash them. And Thich Nhat Hanh said to the American, no, don't wash the dishes. And he said, no, you've made me this great meal, I want to wash the dishes. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, but you don't know how to wash dishes. He said, of course I know how to wash dishes. I'm a bachelor. I've washed dishes in my apartment all the time. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, well, why do you wash the dishes? And the American, in the presence of this great Buddhist, tried to think of some clever answer and said, well, we wash the dishes to prepare, to cleanse the plate so another delicious meal can be delivered tomorrow on these same dishes. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, no, you wash dishes to wash dishes. And what he means is while you're washing dishes, you're supposed to focus on just the flow of the water and the suds. And there are exercises like that that I've done now for maybe 10 or 15 years that I try to focus on pushing all of the thought away, other than thought of the task at hand. And those exercises have helped me a lot, particularly with anger management. I'm someone who had a lot of, I guess I would say, anger management issues when I was in my 20s. And now it's rare that I get angry.
Yeah, I noticed in the book you mentioned that when you see brake lights, you look at them as the face of the Buddha.
Yeah. That's another one. I also learned that one from Thich Nhat Hanh. I remember I was driving an ex-girlfriend to the airport in Boston, driving her to Logan. There's crazy, crazy traffic, and traffic doesn't impact me. And she was shocked that I wasn't upset at all at the traffic. And I remember telling her that this other thing that I read about Thich Nhat Hanh is when you see the taillights come on in front of you, it reminds you of the smiling eyes of Buddha, and you have the incredible privilege at that moment to breathe. So there are things that are stressful in our life that we can turn into joy, and it's just a decision. I think getting angry at someone is bringing cancer upon yourself. It's kind of like, imagine if someone cut you off in traffic, would you, as a result of that, hit yourself in the head with a hammer? No, because that would hurt. But why get mad at them? Because when you get mad at them and yell at them and swear at them, that's also bringing damage to your body.
Right.
It's internal damage. And so if you just make that choice, that if you recognize that anger brings violence internal, there's a Buddhist saying that anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have a quote from Brenda that used to say that. She would say, anger is an incredible gift that someone is giving you. It gives you an opportunity to figure out something about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's true.
That's a great reflection. Going back to startups, so you started Blade, and then from there you decided to create a company called Lola. Can you talk about Lola?
Yeah, so with Kayak, I spent 10 years of my life trying to revolutionize online travel. And with Lola, I'm just year one in, but I'm guessing might be another 10-year project of trying to revolutionize offline travel. So offline travel means travel booked actually on the phone, like in a phone call. And surprisingly to most people in tech, 46% of travel booked in the United States is booked over the phone. Either people call Marriott or Delta or an old school travel agent or their corporate travel agent, a cruise specialist, safari specialist. There are many different types of agents. And that industry has had no tech innovation in decades. And so what Lola is trying to do is we believe that if you throw out all the travel agent software, which is a substantial amount of technology, and you rewrite it from scratch and give travel agents tools that they've never had before, those tools can provide a user experience that is impossible to get through any other method. And so what we found is that users sometimes want to talk on the phone, sometimes they want to message, sometimes they want to email. And we have a mobile app that allows you and will soon allow you to do more things like that. So it's a multimodal app that allows you to communicate with Lola any way you want. And there's a human travel agent on the other end that is doing all the research and planning and booking for you.
And are the travel agents located in the United States, or?
Yeah, so the first 20 are located in Boston next to the engineers because I want them to feel the pain. I want the engineers to feel the pain when things don't work well for the travel agents. The ultimate plan is to let anyone in the world apply to be a travel agent on Lola.
Okay.
And have them go through some extensive exams, online exams and video, maybe Skype video exam. And then once we verify their expertise, we can plug them into the platform.
Oh, nice. So they're kind of like their own independent contractors working there? Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Because you mentioned with Kayak, you had like a red phone that people could call directly.
Yeah, it was funny that I was telling someone earlier today that when I left Kayak, the guy who I promoted to take my job, who's an extraordinary CTO, I think he must have had a list of 10 things to change about the company the day I left, and one of them was he unplugged the red phone. The red phone, I literally had the phone number. If you click the help button on Kayak, the help screen comes up with a bunch of options. And for 10 years while I was there was a phone number as well, and that phone number rang, the red phone on my desk. And I bought a phone that was particularly loud. It had a mechanical ringer. And I bought the phone thinking that it's going to really annoy the engineers, which was my intent. And the engineers would say, that's really effing loud, that's really distracting. And I would just say, there's a very simple solution. This is a 2-part phone, and if you lift up this top part, the ringing stops. And then if you put that top part to your head and you say, hello, there'll be someone on the other end that will teach you something about your product that you don't know.
Right.
So to me, phone calls from customers, I feel like companies should be paying customers to call them, because it's funny that marketing organizations have primary research budgets, and yet people put these IVRs and frequently asked questions and all these systems between customers and the engineers, where I think that if you let the engineers actually talk to customers, you can accelerate learning.
You mentioned in the book, it says that you tried to
He did mention, yeah.
Yeah. You tried to buy a lighthouse. Can you explain that story?
Yeah, actually,
why don't you
describe that story? Yeah. Because I was a little bit manic at the time, and I think Tracy was sane at the time.
More or less. Yeah. Well, you, as I recall, there was a notice of a lighthouse up for auction. It was on the most seaward lighthouse in Boston Harbor. That is right out in the ocean on a pile of rocks called Graves Ledges. Paul loves parties, and he wanted to make a new kind of party place. I saw the emails, and anyway, the description of the lighthouse wasn't all that encouraging, though, because it had no plumbing, no electricity, and to get to it, which was really only safe to do in calm weather, but to get to it, to get into the lighthouse, you had to climb on a ladder 30 feet long. And I was kind of interested to imagine the people in their party clothes looking down at these crashing waves. The next day, Paul awoke and thought, what have I done? That's the stupidest thing I've ever done. But I guess hypomania is not entirely unusual in Boston, because someone bid more for the lighthouse. Got him off the hook. It's, most of Paul's fits of hypomania were as harmless as that. When I mentioned that story to Brenda, her significant other, she just laughed for about 5 minutes. And she said, it's nothing. What harm did that do? Something good would have come out of it, she said. I don't know. I must say, hypomania is a fascinating phenomenon to me. I did some research on it, and I spoke to a great expert on it, and a clinician researcher, and I said, somehow I can't quite explain it. I kind of know when this guy is about to, when this thing is beginning to take over. And he said, well, that's perceptive of you. I don't think I know any clinicians who deal with people who are subject to hypomania who wouldn't tell you that it's contagious. They would say it was contagious, in the sense that you feel it. I think of a guitar string being plucked and another instrument's sounding board vibrating. A sense for me of things coming just a little too fast. And the story I've told, which is it seems innocuous, but his winter days, I remember these winter days, Paul was had about 10 meetings every day, but get to a restaurant, get our coats hung up. Everything's going okay, and Paul said something that I want to write down. I write this down, because I like to take notes. And I look up, and suddenly, somehow, he's in his winter coat, and he's standing there, and he's smiling, and he's saying very pleasantly, "Ready to go?" It's the way I think of it.
Yeah, the hypomanic stuff, I think, has been a contributor to my success. Bipolar has the downs and the ups, and the downs for me were near crippling when I was in my 20s. I would spend a lot of time housebound and on the floor of my bedroom. I couldn't even sleep on a bed. It's hard to explain why that was the case. And luckily, at some point, I discovered a med that works really well for me for the downs. I used to have panic attacks a lot, but I haven't experienced any of the real downs or panic attacks for more than 10 years now. But on the ups, the tricky thing about it is the meds that I will get to work for me after about a year on a new med, my visualization of what happens is the brain finally figures out how to work its way around the med and rewires itself, and the med no longer works. Then you begin this quest. But the problem is when you go through manic phases, which for me last weeks at a time, sometimes months, it feels really, really good. It feels very electrifying, like I can feel it in my arms all the time. And the problem with being manic or hypomanic is left untreated, you can do really stupid things, and you're filled with grandiosity and your mind races. People become really slow, and I have this perception when I'm manic that other people just can't understand me and they can't keep up with me, which I know is just the grandiosity speaking when I'm sane. And I pursue with vigor lots of crazy different ideas all the time. But and there's other downsides of being manic as well. I write large checks. I hook up with people I shouldn't be hooking up with. There's a lot of things I do when I'm totally manic that I then end up later regretting. But I think overall it's been really useful as an entrepreneur to have these weeks at a time, if not months, of the crazy energy.
Mm-hmm. Do you have like totems or things you use to like remind yourself, like if you're caught in this manic state, like, oh, I'm being manic right now, maybe I need to take a couple steps back, or is it?
Yeah, a lot of it I notice for some reason when I'm driving. I'm very I notice very strongly lighting. I've always been interested in lighting, and I'll notice the sides of buildings. Let's say I'm driving by a brick building. I can almost tell what time it is by the color of the brick because the quality of the sunlight changes during the day. And when I'm manic, the brick sort of lights up and it turns a different color. And I just become really, really perceptive of things around me. And if there are people in my car, the people become invisible, and I just focus on the grass or different things around me start becoming electrifying. And I don't know, have you ever been in a car accident?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, like the moment before there's a collision, your body jacks with adrenaline.
Right.
So when I'm high, that lasts for days at a time. And the first time it started happening to me, I was in my 20s. It's a very uncomfortable feeling because it feels like something's wrong with you and you should go to the hospital because you're completely jacked with adrenaline and there's no way to stop it. But later, when you learn to manage it, it's kind of a fun thing. I do now, when these incidents happen, and I start with this, I would call on fire, many times when I wake up first thing in the morning, I do know that I should check in with my psychiatrist and just say, if I've been going days at a time with very, very little sleep, I should probably have a med check and see if I need to do something different just to keep me from going a little bit too far, where I disconnect from reality, I disconnect from people, and I make really rash decisions that are sometimes bad decisions.
Yeah. And it seems as time has gone on, you'll be able to channel that energy towards more constructive aims.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys very much for this. I'm going to turn this section to audience questions. So if anyone has audience questions, feel free to come up to the mic.
I'm curious, in response to that, have you ever come across in your career the works of E.F. Schumacher? Buddhist Economics, Small is Beautiful.
I have.
Maybe you can say a little bit about how his thoughts reflect on your career. And also, I'm curious, what do you teach or talk about when you teach at the Berkeley School, being a musician?
So I guest lecture there on innovation and creativity. I used to be a musician. I'm not a musician anymore, but I know enough about music that I can speak to music students. And we talk about the business. You know, musicians are actually entrepreneurs, right? Because every musician has to create their living, and most musicians, I would say, are entrepreneurs. And so I'll talk about entrepreneurial skills you need, even if you're, quote unquote, just a musician. Entrepreneurial work is not just for engineers, it's for anyone who's sort of a sole practitioner trying to create a business.
Thank you so much for joining us here.
You're welcome,
appreciate
Jordan.
it. Let's give him a round of applause.